Hello and welcome back to Ticker Talks, and yes, it is time we talked. First up, I would like to acknowledge that this segment is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and I pay my respects to elders both past, present and future as well. Now, joining me as always is Director from Polaron, Eva Hussein, in the studio. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mike. How are you?
Now, I'm doing well, but how's the team at Polaron been this week? I imagine it's very busy for you guys. What are you working on?
It is busy. We're heading towards the end of financial year, so that's always a time where everybody wants to spend their budget. And it's been interesting to see what sort of projects come our way. And of course, this week we're going to be talking about multicultural fashion, which we're very excited about.
And I understand you guys were doing some translations with the Japanese language services as well. Was there something there you wanted to unpack?
Yeah, so we don't do such a lot of fashion, I guess, because it's a very competitive industry, I guess. But every now and then we get to do translations of fashion pieces or collateral, and we're going to be seeing one particular thing that we did a couple of years ago. To do with Ugg or I don't even know if we're allowed to use that because it's a name that somebody's got trademarked, right?
Of course.
So you have to use different names. But the interesting thing about this particular piece of collateral is that normally what happens when you sell anything to a market, you need to localize it. In other words, you might use different images, you might use different colors even. So if you look at, say, McDonald's, they look quite different in China than in Australia because they respond to the local needs. But in this particular case, I guess because Australia is such a big brand that they're selling an Australian item or sheepskin in this case, they stuck to looking Australian, which is quite interesting. So when it comes, we call that localization. When we produce translations for a particular market, we would adjust it to what people might need or what people might perceive as good, so that it sells. In this case, the company left it as is because that's what resonates with the market there in Japan.
Interesting. Okay, so it's sort of, a design standpoint as well as language that you might use. Now, speaking of language, let's go into miscommunication of the week.
Yes.
What have you seen? What have you got for us this week?
So look, in preparation for the show, and we've got some really wonderful guests today, I've looked at what's called appropriation, I guess, or miscommunication, or the fine line between localization or producing something for a particular market, or designing a fashion item and using it in a way that's not appropriate. So I think our guests will talk about this further, but every now and then there's a scandal, particularly from really big fashion designers who might borrow, if you like, an item of clothing or an idea, and it does not resonate, it doesn't work, it creates actually embarrassment for the brand. So I think today we're going to be talking about that fine line. What is it okay to do? What is it not okay to do when it comes to fashion and borrowing items from a culture?
Fantastic. I think that's a really important one. Well, let's bring in our guests for today. And we've got Sonia Sadiq Gandhi from Fabrics of Multicultural Australia and Aisha Novakovich from Modest Fashion Australia. Welcome both of you today, and apologies about the name there.
Well done. Thank you so much.
I try. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. This is a really important topic to discuss. So, Sonia, I'll start with you. When does multicultural fashion become cultural appropriation? When does it fall into that category that may cause agitation or embarrassment?
I love this question, and I just love what Eva just mentioned about localizing for the market. It's very important, but there is definitely a fine line there when it comes to adoption of an element or of cultures from members going and adopting it for other cultures. And I can see that fabulous FOMA image there. What happens here is there is a lot of times when this is appreciated when it's done right, of course. The localizing of markets with what fashion designers presume to be the norm can sometimes sort of fall into sacred artifacts being used as accessories. And this is a common problem that we've seen across the board globally, not just in Australia. Calligraphy, worn across representation of calligraphy that represents religious meaning to certain communities, worn on your, cleavage, that sometimes creates a lot of, that whole cultural misappropriation comes into play. I guess when you engage with other cultures, the most important thing with multicultural cultures, I give an example always of America, which is very interesting. Because if you think about it, what would America be like if we loved Black people as much as we loved the Black culture, right? It's the same thing. When you celebrate Chinese New Year, when you're celebrating the Eid festival, when you're celebrating all these cultures and the clothing and the food that comes with these cultures, would you love the actual community or the cultural, understanding that you have of that person as much as you would love their culture? And that is where that fine line is. But it also comes down to the whole purpose of how multicultural fashion breaks down the stereotype through visual art, which is very, very important.
Aisha, can I get your insight on the that line that we're treading there and when it becomes,
Yes.
appropriation?
Well, yes, I have some opinions on this topic. I'd like to make 2 points. The first is I think it comes down to intention. Why is it happening? Is it just a cynical kind of rip-off in order to commercialize aspects of a culture through their fashion? Or is it done with the intent to build bridges of understanding and friendships and to deeply appreciate that culture and experience of fashion and food and celebration and coming together? I think people who are always at the receiving end of this so-called cultural appropriation understand the clear difference. I'll give an example. So when I first started Modest Fashion Australia as a very flexible and open platform, I actually had a mentor at that time who asked me, he said to me, would it be offensive to you if a girl, say at university, just wanted to wear a headscarf or a hijab, just as a fashion accessory, not with any kind of religious or cultural basis? And I said, to be honest, in my view, I wouldn't take that as a form of offense. I know that there would be others who would be, but particularly because we are so excluded from the mainstream anyway, that for me, I think sometimes could be seen as a form of flattery or even just challenging some stereotypes, because hijab and headscarves are not just limited to Muslim women. And so when you start to normalize the practice of hijab or other cultural dress, I think it can change the dialogue and can make it more acceptable in the mainstream. But I think you have to maintain a genuine and sincere form of sensitivity.
Well, just on that, Aisha, how do creative arts and fashion, for instance, break down these stereotypes? And if you can elaborate a bit further on that.
I think it's about being creative and innovative. And for me, it was always about providing safe spaces to be really inclusive. So back in my earlier days, when I was younger and at university, I used to be like really radical. I'm still radical today in a lot of ways, but I was like very political, and I found that was very confrontational for a lot of people to actually change and shift attitudes and mindsets towards the cultural other. What I found through fashion and the creative arts and food is that it's a way of bringing people together. So you're breaking down it's a very gentle form of kind of addressing people's fears and actually inviting them into the space to participate rather than being just a spectator.
I like that you touched on fear there, and I think there is an element of, not wanting to upset or cause harm. And so the fear sometimes comes out of that. Sonia, can you talk to us a bit about that for a moment, about how art and fashion can also, be used to strip back that fear and be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think we're home to the world's oldest continuous culture, and we identify with over 270 ancestries. So I think the whole connect between the visual arts element and fashion breaking down the stereotype is huge. But it's also very important to understand how much of an economic contribution, if you look at the Australian fashion and the society and the textile sector bring to the economy. There was a recent report by Rag Trader that it was actually this month that was launched, and it said it's 16.3 billion dollars it brings to the economy. Still, there is a lot of hesitation with governments when it comes to globally, let me tell you, multicultural fashion and art. yes, it definitely breaks down the stereotype, and there's ways around it, because when you're talking designers spend significant amount of time at art galleries and contemporary museums, purely because they try and connect their identity and their cultures with what they're trying to produce and localize for the market. I'm talking from an economic perspective. But I think a lot of the times the breakdown in terms of the stereotypes, when in schools as well, there is on Harmony Days, there are clothing and food being bought in, clothes being worn. Not everyone is aware that you could possibly dress up in a sari. I have a 5-year-old boy who went on the Indian Independence Day dressed up as Nehru. And it was quite interesting because he had so many questions being asked. So the creative arts, right from a very young age, can actually break down a lot of stereotypes. And actually, I think it's a huge conversation starter. And I think without the conversation being started, we can't actually talk about anything. And I must commend the Ticker Talks and Polaron in actually picking a topic like this, because it's very important to firstly have that conversation and then take it to the next level of breaking it down.
I appreciate you saying that, because I've said to Eva on many occasions how great it is to have Polaron, bringing this content to Ticker and sharing it with our audience. So I appreciate that. What about a focus on sustainability? How can fashion businesses and brands both be sustainable and respectful? And I don't know which one of you guys wants to answer this question, but how can they survive, especially with focusing on sustainability as well?
I think the sustainability aspect is the way forward. It's a very hard journey, though, let me tell you. I work with designers through Fabrics of Multicultural Australia, across Australia and internationally through Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The platform, just to give you a bit of context, the FOMA platform, now in its 4th year, works with foreign embassies and how they can represent their cultures. So just an example, in Australia, there is 101 foreign embassies based out of Canberra. From New York, if you compare it, Canberra is the largest place that hosts these foreign governments. What does that tell you? That tells you that there's a diaspora of those governments residing in Australia, a diaspora that is very connected to visual arts, creative arts, and fashion. So when we started FOMA, Fabrics of Multicultural Australia, the aspect of sustainability was a huge, huge factor in making the platform a success. When we're providing opportunities, economic, social, to artists across the board, and that includes wearable art, that includes upcoming fashion designers, sustainability is always in question, like there is a question there. I'll give you an example around, I'm not going to name the designers, but there is a few that we've dealt with that have found it very hard. And this is the hard reality of it all. We can talk about sustainability at any length as we want, but the hard reality of it all is manufacturing and ensuring that you're producing products that are sustainable, right from how the use of the thread, who's actually tailoring for you, where are you making them, and so forth.
Yeah.
That is very hard for designers, especially upcoming designers, to maintain. But again, that is the way forward. I'm not sure if that is the way forward. In big commercial brands, I recently bought a Bond's tights or leggings, and it said on there 89% made by PET bottles fiber. I said, what is that? Because I'm always looking for recycling clothing, and it had this little label on it. And by no shape or form I'm standing here sort of endorsing bonds, but I'm just saying then I looked into it. I spent 2 hours of my next, after coming back home, and looked into what Reprieve meant. So Reprieve is a fiber that's now being used by Best and Less, Target, all these big brands around how sustainable fashion. So it takes about 8,900 bottles, PET bottles, to make the tights that I was wearing.
Sonia, there's so much we could go into there. Unfortunately, I have to wrap the program shortly.
Yes,
but,
of course.
Thank you so much for coming on the program. Sonia Sadiq Gandhi from Fabrics Multicultural Australia, and Aisha Novakovich for your input as well, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Again, Always wanting to, I just want to unpack further, and we always unfortunately run out of time. So it's great to have you guys bringing such great guests, such great topics. As always, Eva, thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you, and see you next week.
Of course. Now, guys, if you're looking for translation services, or if you have any questions about how to reach your multicultural audiences, you can, of course, get in touch with the team at Polaron. Contact details will be on the screen there, and I look forward to seeing you next time. I'm Mike Loder, and that's Ticker Talks.